Everyone who saw the last video will now know that analog horror is one that will really get me spooked. It is genuinely the only time I look away from the screen in anticipation. However, I had asked you guys to leave down below some of your own favorite examples that I could check out. Well, I checked them out and I am both very happy and upset because now I have to live with some of the things I've seen burned into my brain. Yet at the same time, some of these video series were so fascinating in its storytelling and how a lot of the narrative is in the little details sprinkled throughout. I'm saving the worst one for last, so be sure to stick around if you're sick in the head or just an incredibly brave soul. These are all the examples that you guys have recommended me, so without further ado, let's get into these analog horror videos that now have me traumatized. Before we get too far, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you who bombarded my last video I did on analog horror. It was super unexpected to see it perform so incredibly well, and I appreciate it heavily. If you want to check us out outside of YouTube, I do have a letterbox and an Instagram for the channel linked in the description if you want to check those out. Now let's get back to our regularly scheduled programming. The first example was probably the most recommended one in the comments, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is Gemini Home Entertainment. I didn't just tip my toes in the water with these, I watched every episode with intense focus, which was both super interesting and ridiculously terrifying. Gemini Home Entertainment is a video distribution company that produces informational tapes alongside your advertisements and how-to guides. For example, the first episode is World's Weirdest Animals. Starting us off in Minnesota, this little informational video goes on to share various wildlife in different parts of the state. Wilkin County homing some of the greater prairie chickens, the video also does us the courtesy of providing a handful of facts of each example they show. Did you know that they dive into the snow during the winter to keep warm? Neither did I. Clay County shows us the burrowing owl, which is pretty cool. And then, what is located all over the state of Minnesota are wood crawlers. This is where our informational video turns more ominous. Wood crawlers, as we learn, are excellent hunters, and their preferred place of nesting is under the home of large families. We follow someone as they film through a house that has people acting quite strangely. It is revealed that wood crawlers are also able to steal people's voices. This is only the first entry in this 17-episode series. If you haven't seen the rest of it, I highly recommend giving it a watch before I spoil a lot of the cool reveals for you. As the series progresses, we learn about these wood crawlers as the next episode, Storm Safety Tips, goes on to explain what to do in the event of a severe storm attacking your property. We pretty quickly realize that it's not an actual storm we are being warned of, but a swarm of wood crawlers ready to do what they do best. The attention to detail in this entire series is honestly frightening in and of itself. There's a camp information episode that gives us an overview of Moonlight Acres, which then in the next episode we see an advertisement for an FPS game called Lethal Omen, and the location for the game is the camp we just got information on in the last episode. I saw people saying you don't really have to watch them in order, but I highly disagree. Each entry expands the narrative slowly, but makes it to where every episode you've seen prior starts to make a little bit more sense as you carry on. They even made an actual Lethal Omen game that's linked on the YouTube channel. Once we get to the end, we learn that there is a living planet called the Iris that has its eyes set on Earth. Through the lens of a ship called Crusader, we get pictures of the inside of the Iris, and it basically looks as alive and gross as you can get. It also infested Earth with deep root disease, which as we learn is an incredibly painful disease to have. We learn that deep root disease is just another term for the wood crawler transformation per se, except it isn't as we previously predicted before. Humans act as vessels for the wood crawlers as they slowly begin to just take over the body and gain complete control. So long story short, Gemini Home Entertainment is a very thrilling cosmic horror web series about a borderline alien invasion attacking Earth and slowly taking it over. We know how powerful the Iris is as we see in the final episode that Neptune has been completely wiped off the map. I gotta say, going on the Gemini Home Entertainment journey was an absolute blast because instead of feeling like the story is being told to you, it feels more like there is a story that you need to uncover to understand what's going on. And that just makes you all the more invested into the world being created. Next up, we have Local 58, which I've read inspired Gemini Home Entertainment, and you can definitely see the similarities in its early analog programming style. However, from my experience watching the two, Local 58's story is a little bit more hidden in the background. The first entry of this series is The Fastest Available Route. We begin on what looks like your regularly scheduled programming, until it looks like the broadcast is taken over and we start watching dashcam footage of someone getting directions from their GPS.
Turn left onto Merritt Parkway. You are on the fastest available route.
At first, it seems kinda normal until our driver finds himself in the middle of the woods, off-road, and our GPS lady is getting strange.
Head east for 1/4 of a mile, then follow signs for do not enter.
She says to look for signs that say do not enter, which is self-explanatorily weird. Our driver is then told to shut off the headlights, which our driver does, to which we hear a loud roar from the woods.
Rerouting. Make a U-turn. Your destination is behind you.
The driver is speeding away trying to escape, but according to the GPS, his destination is getting closer to him as he tries to drive off. Unfortunately, whatever was chasing him caught up and destroyed the car because all we see is blurry flames and a cracked lens. This is definitely a killer way to start off this horror series, but still not too much to be learned here. Each entry starts out with the programming schedule for the local 58 station, followed by a broadcast intrusion of something not quite right. Contingency is interrupted with a message supposedly from the Department for the Preservation of American Dignity, and from the looks of things, this broadcast would get sent out in the event of the US losing a war. It would encourage all citizens to basically kill themselves, preferably on the front lawn with a gun, but they aren't too picky with the method. Maybe I should have put a warning. What is super eerie is the moment where it says they take care of infants and pets first, our smallest patriots. It's a very disturbing broadcast signal that really unsettled me when I first saw it. The next interruption is a weather warning for a meteorological event. We are told not to look at it, and that the warning will not be lifted until the next morning. It's immediately followed up with a second broadcast correcting the first one, encouraging people to go outside and look at the event. But then that's immediately followed up with a warning telling you to not look at the moon. Text then appears on screen from something saying that if we are afraid to look, then we can look together. And of course, against our will, the camera turns on the moon, and we slowly go to look up before it ends. This is our first mention of the moon being something to be weary of. And after this, it becomes the recurring part of the narrative. The episode after, Show for Children, is a cartoon of a skeleton walking along a cemetery, and we see the moon in the back looking down at him with his creepy cartoon face. As the skeleton walks, he continually peeks down into dug-up graves. He looks down at the first one and, oh boy, what does he see? Fun. He peeks down the next grave he finds, and it's a weird-looking creature curled up but still alive since it starts making noises. At this point, our skeleton is still walking along, however the moon is now hanging back, and no longer has that big grin on his face. The third grave the skeleton finds is just what looks to be an endless tunnel down, which leads him into a big dark cave. We transition to the skeleton laying down, as now he is in the grave looking up. As he looks up, we see the big ol' moon start to shine through the hole, before we cut back and our skeleton friend is now just a dead skeleton. Our second depiction of the moon being somewhat of a threat, as it looks like it killed our main character. The next entry steps away from the moon and goes on to show a tape from the Thought Research Initiative. This appears to be an instructional/informational video about sleep, talking to us about the importance of REM sleep, and even goes on to do a little quiz game where you guess if the statement related to sleep is a myth or a fact. Except every answer was fact, even the ones about dreams predicting the future. This video also seems to have a negative mindset towards the idea of dreaming, saying that it is primitive and nonsensical. After that, we go as far as to introduce the Kleitman map, which when inversed stops you from dreaming, which appears to be what the creator of this video wants. We transition to the next stage of this video, and that is to induce your anti-dream, where the video flashes these weirdly lit faces at you, and then has you try to read really fast flashing text. At the end, it says that some people stop dreaming after only one viewing of the tape. Next up, we have skywatching, which quickly puts us through the lens of one of the most powerful lenses I've ever seen, given how close we get. We start out looking at various constellations, each one's name being displayed on screen before going over to the moon. The moon is oddly named His Throne. After a lot of zooming in, it looks as if the moon is not a huge rock, but another living organism out in space. After some panning around, there also looks to be a very clear arrow etched on the moon pointing at something. What we see next looks like the moon got way closer to the Earth, with an emergency siren going off and our character going out and looking hypnotized by the moon's presence, ending with the text, "Rejoice." The Local 58 series was another really interesting analog horror story to follow. I will say it is a little bit harder to follow since each entry doesn't tie into the other as directly as Gemini seemed to, but in the end it was still a really compelling mystery to try and piece together. The idea of whole planets being living creatures is the most cosmic horror you can get, because what can you even do in that scenario? The Iris as a threat is really scary because of what it sends down to Earth, and how it's able to take control of people and invade from the inside. However, the idea that the moon, which we have always looked up at without too much thought, being something totally outside the bounds of what we thought possible, is just about equally as unsettling. We don't know why or how the moon is doing what it's doing, where it seems that just looking at the moon grants you an unfavorable fate. Our third entry is going to be No Through Road. While I watched all 4 parts, and I think the story is pretty interesting, I do think the original remains in the top spot by a good degree. We follow a group of teenagers who are just driving around. They end up at this tunnel where the sign says, "No Through Road," which states it's also a private road.
Skeleton. Brimhall Farm was in the news.
They drive barely through the tunnel before one of the friends says that they should probably turn around given it's a private road. The group backs out of the tunnel and they go to drive back home, however the road they are on seems to just keep on going. They run into some street signs, so they become under the assumption that they will now get to where they need to go. However, things don't go according to plan when they continually start to end up at this same set of street signs.
Stop, no.
Yeah, no, we just got in a little circle, so it's... Bennington's in the middle, that's all it is.
They are somehow getting looped back to this point. After a couple returns, they decide instead of going straight, they're going to take the turn and see where that takes them. Luckily for them, they end up seeing some streetlights and signs of life as they start to now see other vehicles on the road. The driver pulls one last ultimate prank by shutting the headlights off, but once he flicks them back on, they are right back to that tunnel. I gotta say, my stomach did a little sink when they got put back. It was a very effective moment that I really loved and immediately made me appreciate this piece even more. We end on a masked man attacking all the teenagers as we follow one that was able to escape, but not for very long before the masked man catches up and beats his face in with his own camera. Unlike the others, No Through Road is a lot shorter as it isn't a multiple episode series. Granted, there are a total of 4 parts, but I personally don't find them as effective as this first one. I will say, they introduce really interesting ideas. In the later parts, it's revealed that passing through the tunnel creates a sort of time loop, and the masked man that beats the kid's face in is actually that kid in the future coming back and continuing the loop. Once time travel and loops get involved, my brain is going to start trying to rewire itself, so I try not to think too hard about it. Alright, like I said in the beginning, I saved the worst for last, and by worst, I mean it definitely freaked me out the most and was probably the second most recommended in the last video, you freaky bastards. Urban Spooks. You know, by the title, I honestly didn't think it was going to be too bad until I saw the thumbnails, which I then knew I would be sorely mistaken. Urban Spooks is a web series that follows a police investigation trying to solve a series of murders and catch a serial killer on the loose. At the end of each crime, the killer leaves a painting, which is sometimes an abstract vision of the crime, which is pretty disturbing and I hated each one. Urban Spooks is definitely the most simple in its narrative, but it's also the scariest, and for me, it has to do with the imagery. We know that these are all paintings, but we are also given the context of each one before it is shown. I don't really know if there's too much to talk about with this series, as each video follows a pretty similar formula, yet each one does push the narrative further. Each video describes the crimes and the victims involved before laying out specific investigation details and discoveries. We then go through and see each painting that was left behind at the scene. I really did find Urban Spooks to be the scariest out of all the examples because it isn't about planets that are coming to eat the Earth or about a tunnel that can create time loops, but about a serial killer going around and committing horrible murders. One of these happens in real life, while the others I have yet to experience. In my last video, I described that the reason analog horror gets a lot of people is because the idea of it being told through analog television somehow grounds it down more to reality. The best thing about it, however, is when something is so far outside the realms of reality, being presented in a way that is incredibly grounded. However, with urban spooks, everything that is being displayed could very well happen. That about does it for this video. If you enjoyed, give this video a big ol' thumbs up and perhaps a quick subscribe while you're at it. And if you want me to talk about even more analog horror so I can torture myself even further, leave some more examples down below and I'll be sure to try and check them out.